Especially with such a nebulous title like what is social good? It's gonna be philosophy. We're gonna really quickly introduce ourselves and then just dive right into it. We really want this to be a very open conversation. I'm gonna ask a few questions to get things going, but feel free to jump in. This is everyone's conversation, and we're really only going to discover the answer to this question when we start to approximate it through a very robust community conversation on this. So, my name is Matt Gee. I'm one of the co-founders of DSSG. I'm a senior research fellow at the Center for Data Science and Public Policy, and run an entity outside the university called the Impact Lab that is focused on scaling a lot of the solutions.
Hello, I'm Elena Eneva. I am a data scientist. My background is machine learning, data mining. I work at Accenture, which is a large consulting company, and I'm in the science branch of it, so I'm in Accenture Analytics. My background in terms of domain is I've done a lot of work in healthcare, and lately I am switching over to, or branching into sensors, streaming data, analytics, and things like that. And my involvement with DSSG began a few years ago when it was first founded, and I was one of the mentors the first year. I'm based in the Bay Area, so I took a sabbatical from work. I moved to Chicago, and I had an amazing summer working with fellows. And since then, I've been involved just remotely with DSSG because it's hard to move to Chicago every summer.
So my name is Bill Howe. I'm at the University of Washington. I'm associate director of a place called the E-Science Institute, where we look at data-intensive science across all fields, and recently been pushing much harder in the social sciences and for urban sciences. We kicked off a data science for social good program. I saw one of Ryan's talks one place, and I was texting people and sending emails about it. I said, hey, we should do this as well. And a year and a half later, we borrowed the name and the mission and kicked off our own program. And we presented some of the projects just now. And more broadly, my background in computer science. I'm a database guy who dabbles in machine learning here and there because everybody does that. Yeah, exactly.
You just need a course every course. Yeah. I heard someone has a pretty good one, though.
My name is Adria Finch. I work in the city of Syracuse in the Office of Innovation, and we are just a little over a year old now, and we are grant funded, and each year we have to focus on a different challenge that exists in our city. So last year we focused on infrastructure within the city of Syracuse, specifically water mains and roads, and also sewer system in some capacity. How can we improve those? This year we have just recently switched focus, and we are now trying to improve increased economic opportunities for people living in areas of concentrated poverty. So we're still in our research phase of this work, but we're really excited about moving forward with it, and it really ties into this work of data science for social good. I accidentally wound up in government. I have a background in biomechanics, so now I'm trying to apply some of the science work that I did there, and at least the research background with this innovation and government work.
Great. All right, so we're going to start off with a softball. So there's a bit of a conceit to just the name data science for social good, right? Like it's we do data science, but just the good stuff, right? not what all the other data scientists are doing. So it's got this implicit judgment on the rest of data science. It's either data science for social bad or data science for social meh, right? And we're just going to do the good stuff. So let's just start out by trying to understand what is it that we mean when we say that. What do you guys think of? What attracted you to the term? What do you think of when you hear the term data science for social good?
Maybe I'll jump in a little bit, say a little bit how I got into this space. So I mentioned the E-Science Institute, where we're looking at sort of data science applied to all fields. And we're talking about the strong person and non person. That was really our traditional kind of wheelhouse. And so in science, a lot of times the, let's say, analog of social good will be things like reproducibility, will be things like, no junk science, try to avoid, sort of e-hacking and so on. But what we found was that, what I found, I guess, sort of personally, is when we sort of have a poster session and look around at what kind of projects were coming out, the people in the social sciences are really doing the biggest, the sharpest left turns in their research due to these methods, due to the availability of data. surveys to 25 graduate students doing analysis on that. They were trying to figure out how to sort of mine Twitter. And this is a broad exercise, right? They don't understand the skill sets involved. There's statistical issues in doing that. There's scale issues in doing that. And so we saw a real need to sort of help out in that space. And after pursuing some of those projects, we got connected up with the city of Seattle. We connected up with some nonprofits in the area, and it just seemed to kind of snowball from there. So, you know, what is social good? I think we sort of identify partners who have a easier reputation of earning the moniker social good, and then partner with them. Really having to define ourselves. So maybe that's my basic answer.
So it's either tax status of the institution, or okay, that makes it easy.
Yeah. The way I ended up in social good is, as a data scientist, I feel very privileged to have so much choice of where I can work, right? Facebook's hiring, Twitter's hiring, you know, everybody wants you. And the question is, what do you want to do, right? And I feel very strongly about leaving the world a better place than I found it. You know, it's a lofty goal, right? How do you do it? But I don't think it's by, you know, making Facebook a little bit more user-friendly and predictive and whatnot, right? It seems like there's so many domains that are clearly more impactful, right? Like improving healthcare, right? Reducing child mortality, right? And so as you're deciding where do you go, if you have a choice, it's easy to say healthcare is a good one, right? I'm going to pick the obvious good ones and get them out there. So from that and from, I've known Marie for a long time and so many years, social good and so on, and then getting involved with DSSG. I think that's kind of a progression of just, you have a choice, make the right choice at every point when you have a choice in your career and in your volunteering and your hobbies.
So I'm still relatively new to government, but I've worked alongside it for a while now. And one of the things that I've really come to notice is that, well, first of all, the main function of government is to provide to the citizens. So unfortunately, a lot of the programs or initiatives that are started in government are started based upon anecdotes or qualitative data, or it's just, you know, I heard that we need this. And to some degree, that's really important. But we're really starting in Syracuse to start to try to switch our focus. So we're using quantitative data to make informed, educated decisions on things that will really impact the constituents and provide a benefit for the city as a whole. How can we effectively use tax dollars? What are the most important things for citizens? So in our infrastructure work, it was really interesting. We actually focused on infrastructure because our mayor is just very passionate about it, and we were spending a lot of money on emergency water main repairs and other issues. But when we actually started to engage the citizens and we said, well, what do you think about infrastructure? What do you care about? A lot of the things that we were focusing on weren't necessarily what they cared about. So yeah, they want the potholes to be filled, but you know, it's not the end of the world if they drive over one. But what we did start to do was really listen to what they wanted, and we heard that they wanted to have a way to do citizen reporting. So can they call in and say, you know, stop sign has fallen over, or can they be informed about how long it takes for one of their citizen requests to be addressed, and can they find out about infrastructure work? So just by taking the time to actually talk to people and start to apply data to these problems, we're able to better see what the needs of citizens are and how we're addressing them. So this is kind of new to us, but we're excited to be introducing it. I think that's one of the really important things about doing good is that you need to make sure that somebody's benefiting from it, and in some capacity you're giving people something that they want.
So I want to follow up on that, because I think this is a really important point. I think with a lot of presentations and a lot of work done at our institution and other institutions over the last 4 years, you can kind of get the warm fuzzies of saying you're doing social good if you're working with a government or a nonprofit. Okay, great. And they're fall into one of those buckets, so we're social good. But you were really hitting at something, I think, much more fundamental and much more important, which is actually seeing the effect on citizens' lives. How do we actually see whether we're doing good? How do we measure it? What are the ways that we can not just say, great, we're working with the right kind of institution, but no, we've actually made an appreciable difference?
And I think it's difficult because some of these things can't be assessed in the short term.
Can you speak up a little bit?
You can act in the short term, but you can't necessarily assess in the short term. It takes sort of a
Yeah, can you go in the back of
multi-year.
No, if there is a mic, if you could use it, then do it. Great.
I can get the.
So if, oh, girl, you know, plenty of good So I guess my.
Microphones for social good?
So my initial reaction was just channeling some of the social sciences we work with where assessment of these things takes a long time while the action may take less time. So I you know, this is maybe the second question of evaded, but I don't know how to do it in the same kind of time scale that we would sort of desire in a data science for social good program. A lot of these things that we're, you know, if you're looking at sort of making an impact on homelessness, you're not going to see that kind of a change within a few months, right? That's going to be sort of a multi-year thing. So I think if there is a recommendation here, is sort of partner with social scientists to put it into context within a longer time scale understanding of the problem, and that's perhaps the best we can do.
Do you think we, as a community, broadly speaking, are not doing that enough? That the impact evaluation side that social scientists have done quite gotten really good at the last half century isn't shared enough up with programs?
I would think that's fair. I think there's representation from three different groups. You need the sort of people on the ground that are doing the work to deploy this stuff. I think you do need the longer time scale for the research context, and then you need the people actually building the methods, the talent that we have doing it. And I think many times you have less representation from one of the first two. You know, there's not enough stakeholder engagement or perhaps not enough research engagement. All three are sort of important to have represented in the ideal case.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, very difficult question, right? How do you measure it?
We're asking the hard questions. We ask the hard questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid we may not be able to solve this on this panel. You know, it's that difficult.
Hey, we've got another like 45 minutes. This can work.
That's why I said may not. But when we're setting out to do a project, often this is already determined as the project is being set up, right? So we're going to do X, you know, let's gather a committee, let's pull together a team, and we will improve, we'll figure out abandoned houses and address them, or, you know, whatever the issue is, or we will find patients who need the most immediate help and we'll send help to them. And the metrics are determined, kind of, they're assumed and they're determined as you go into it. And there's some bias in who is setting them out or what department this is coming from. And so by the time things get to us as data scientists, there's not a lot we can do about the matrix and about the metrics and what we are measuring, how to steer this. So I think it's very important that this is something that everybody in the decision process keeps in mind and is set out very, very early on and is discussed, right? So, for example, something I think that everybody has heard of and thought of is speed traps, right? So as you're driving down the freeway and you're speeding, that's against the law, it's dangerous potentially, right? And so police departments set up speed traps and so on, and they gather revenue from the tickets, and that funds the departments. You've read studies or articles. And there's some studies that show that having more speed traps doesn't cause reduced accidents, right? And so is it social good to say, let's have, you know, the best speed traps, more speed traps, let's find better ways of catching those speeders, right? Is that social good, right? And I think one department might say, absolutely, look at what we're doing, and another department might say, not really, right?
Maybe it raises revenue for the department.
Right. And maybe raise revenue, and that's social good, but, is it? So I think this is such a fundamental question that it needs to be discussed as a project is being set up, not like, here's your project, now figure out the right KPIs to measure, right?
So I'm wondering if, Adria, you can tell us a little bit about your experience doing that, actually. That if you feel that it's very important, at least at the beginning of the project, that everyone is aligned on why they think this is going to be impactful, what they're really going after. How did you, with the projects that you've gone about doing, how have you defined the goodness that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. We go through a thorough vetting process during research, and where we have to identify metrics that we want to track, but also targets. But we have to, so we take this big priority that is infrastructure, and then we divide it into different challenges. So our roads are terrible, our water is terrible, we don't do any coordination to improve our infrastructure. And then from there, we look at each thing and we identify contributing factors. So but also effects, so causes and effects. So because our water mains are bad, like yes, we're spending extra money on repairing breaks, we are tearing up our roads. That's really bad, but let's really start to look at the root of these issues or the human interaction with them. Somebody could be going without water for 24 hours. They only get one flush of their toilets. Like they, can't take showers. Perhaps, we've seen economic effects. So we've had breweries that have had to shut down and have lost, 500 gallons of beer. So there's an economic cost. So it's really, you have to look at this broad challenge and start to distill it down to the human level and look at how it's impacting the citizens, the economy, the people in your community, and really start to identify those other variables that could be affected by this larger umbrella issue. And so that's what we do, and we try to track those smaller things as well as the larger challenge, targets, and metrics.
One other example I wanted to mention, you sort of think about the project vetting process, which is really fascinating to hear. Coming from the data scientist point of view, there's a story that's pretty well known, but I only discovered it, I guess, maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. It's well known in the social sciences about Barrow, Alaska. Have you heard of that? Some people got in their head. So this is the town that's on literally the northernmost point of Alaska, and in around 1979, I think there was a problem with alcoholism. So it's about half Inuit, half other folks. They invited sociologists to come up and sort of study the problem and make recommendations. And this has gone down as a classic case study in ethics for statistics and data science. Of course, the term data science wasn't used then. But so there were some methodological problems with the study, but overall it was a reasonable study. The problems really came with how they sort of announced results. So they had done some profiling and done some analysis, and then unilaterally and apart from the town, announced results, invited the press, and the New York Times picked up the headline that was essentially Eskimos are alcoholics, and this was the finding. So what's interesting about this example is that it wasn't that somebody's privacy was violated, right? This was, even if you didn't participate in the study at all, you were still harmed by by the fact that this was done in this way. That the town's bond rating was lowered. And so the reason I sort of brought up the this question was that sometimes I think it's not so much about trying to identify social good, it's about doubling down to protect yourself from social harm, given kind of competing objectives. In this case, kind of the fame or the scientists, they were excited about their results and wanted to get it out there, and they put their needs kind of ahead of their clients. And I think this is perhaps one of the ways where things can go wrong, as opposed to the project itself somehow wasn't the right project to pick. Clearly studying this problem from, I don't think anybody would claim that it was a bad idea to study the problem. It was just about how it went out. So I guess I get more concerned about those kind of issues than in identifying which one's the potential for social good, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I want to drill down on that point in 2 different ways. I want to do it first, looking at this general challenge that we have of unintended consequences. Right? So obviously, one way of characterizing data science is that it's about generating actionable insights. It's the consultants that approach to data science. But our sphere of influence as data scientists kind of end at the insight and not at the action. And so we can do as much as we can to control the kind of information that goes out and make sure it's precise and that we've done our job methodologically, responsibly. But what people do with it is completely out of our control. And there are plenty of examples like the one you just gave, or since most of the projects in DSSG create rank ordered lists, there are plenty of examples of, for example, in Boston, a rank order list of doctors that going out, cost effectiveness of their procedures led to a bunch of people that needed heart surgery not getting it, and a bunch of people who didn't need it suddenly getting it, because all the doctors wanted to improve their survivability metrics on this new public list. And so there are plenty of ways that the information we produce, while really well intended, can do a lot of fun. What is the data scientist Hippocratic oath, and how do we go about as best as possible, responsibly, trying to think through many potential consequences for what we produce and try to avoid them?
That's a hard question. Another.
So maybe just to get the ball rolling a little bit, I do think there's been kind of a gold rush over the last, I don't know, 8 years or something in the area of data science, and the focus has really been on what we can do with this stuff. Right? Oh, we can use credit card transactions to infer something about something completely unrelated, and let's see how far we go with that. And I think now we're shifting into a bit more discussion about what we should do as opposed to what we can do with this stuff, and what that actually means, all the way down from all the way up from the forward edge of machine learning and computer science research, all the way down to how it's applied, is starting to be affected by this. So, for example, with rank ordered lists, you can happily generate these things and have the results like you described. You can also have more mundane things that are bad, which is, you train something to organize your candidates for some job, and you might get to sort of page 5 before you find the first African American. When it was a human sort of guiding this process, that tended to not happen as much, but the algorithm might sort of happily produce that. And so, unless you build into the methods some notion of the societal goals of diversity and fairness and so forth, you're going to get these results, and you better sort of guard against that. And I think people are studying that from, again, from computer science research on how to build that into methods, but also in how these things are deployed. Another example I saw recently was, let's see, it was I'm not sure which company it was. I'm going to say it was Verizon, but it may not have been, so he's recording that. Well, they are. Oh, well. Too late. It may not have been Verizon. I think it was a communication company offering a deal in the city of Atlanta, and did not include any kind of protected attributes like race or anything like that, but surveyed the things on income and call history and all these kinds of things that are reasonable to build a model on. But the result was that if you draw it on a map, which a journalist did some number of months later, the north half of Atlanta all received the deal, and the south half of Atlanta did not. So what's true about the north half of Atlanta versus the south half of Atlanta? So people for the tech, probably not audience. I grew up in Atlanta, so but the north half of Atlanta is largely white, and the south of Atlanta is largely black. So they have basically redlined themselves kind of inadvertently. But it's not like it takes a lot of rocket science to plot the map the same way the journalist does and kind of check yourself, right? And so they sort of said, well, and the initial response was kind of well, look, we didn't include any of those attributes, so it's fine, right? Well, zip code correlates very strongly with these protected attributes, so you have to go a little further than just, well, I didn't look at race in my model. There's ways to kind of rediscover that, and you have to kind of protect against that. So I think these kind of discussions are now starting to happen, and that's becoming part of the what it means to be sort of responsible data scientists, is getting to be a little more nuanced, a little more subtle than I think it was 5 years ago.
Remembering that algorithms are amoral, and so we have to inject morality into them.
Exactly. So the quote that I have been mentioning maybe too much, but it was fun, was machine learning is a great way to make a computer look like a racist asshole.
So, Elena, when you are building a model at Accenture or when you're at DSSG, how did you avoid building algorithms that were racist assholes?
I think the phase that's essential is the design phase. And we are very fascinated by the, what many people call the black box of the models. And we spend way too much time thinking about that, I think, and not too much time thinking about what happens after. And so a very good exercise that occasionally happens, is forced upon you, is to say, let's just assume we have the perfect model. Let's say, boom, we have it, right? What comes next? How do you use it? What are some ways that somebody can use it to game the system? How is it going to be applied? What problems is it going to solve? Because often people are not ready to take it, right? They say, oh, well, once we have it, then we're going to have to solve all these other problems and have to be able to apply it. or they haven't thought about what it means to have the prediction, right? And when I say sometimes you're forced into it, often you start a project and you don't have the right data, and it takes forever to get it from all the right sources and get the data dictionaries and understand. And that's the perfect time to use and say, while we're working on that, let's proceed with the rest of the planning, and not say, well, we'll wait till we get the data and then we'll keep going. Right? You don't actually need the data to start working and to build the essential part of the project, which is what happens after, right? And so how you protect is, to some extent, you also think about the assumptions, right? What went in there, what was or is going to be in the data that you're feeding, and what is not in the data, right? So potentially, what kind of edge cases can you have? And I come from a computer science background, so I think it's very useful in any problem to think about the edge cases, right? How can things break? If you don't have this data, or if new data becomes available, how will things change? And what is the worst case that the algorithm can produce, right? So you have to kind of pick it apart and do some QA on this potential result ahead of time to have any chance of having a successful deployment afterwards. And of course, you need another phase after you have the model. When you do some sanity checks, right? You plot it, you say, how can people use it? If you give it to somebody who's clueless, will they just kind of let it run on its own, and then eventually it veers off and doesn't even produce the right results, and then nobody's going to notice, and they'll still keep relying on it, right? So you have to account for that as well. So it's a lot of responsibility. It's not just, hey, we have a model, look at that, all done, right? It's an awesome model.
So, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, and it's kind of tailing off what you guys have said. So I'm not a data scientist, but in Syracuse we are trying to use data a lot more now, but there's still a lot of skepticism and hesitation. And I know that probably other industries are much more advanced than we are, but I've seen it in other areas too. So I had a meeting at City Hall here in Chicago earlier this week, and they have a new office, and we were asking them about kind of like neighborhood level economic development and the data behind it that they're using to start these new initiatives. And even here in Chicago, they were saying, oh, well, we know the problems. We don't need the data. So as data scientists, I think one of the responsible things to do is, and I know you won't always have this opportunity, but the people who are making these decisions or developing programs or really using the data that's put together, we need a tutorial. We need to understand what goes into that. We need to understand the consequences of some actions, and I mean, even press-related things that are going out. Like, we have to make sure that you guys have to tell us, like, not to say something stupid, really. And so, really educating us about the data model, and those people who aren't as familiar with everything that's been created.
I mean, one thing I heard in both of these answers, I guess, is this need for transparency in the model as well, right? If you can trade a few accuracy points for something that's much more actionable and intuitive to people, you should usually do that. So there's some work, so Cynthia Bruce's work comes on mind here, where she was looking at these, for medical diagnoses, there's these tables that you see sometimes, where it's like, does the patient have jaundice? Well, that's worth 1 point. Does some other symptom, that's worth 2 points, then you add up the score, and if there were some threshold, they died of diseases. These things were built by humans, by committee over many years and so on. But her thing was like, well, look, we can train models to produce these kinds of human interpretable models. So the characteristics they have is you can't have a list of 100 things. It needs to be like 5 or 6, and it needs to be sort of integer, small integer coefficients as opposed to some weird things with 10 decimal places that nobody understands. And there was a couple other constraints that she had. But this was a nice set of work, right? What the models it produced did as well as the ones that were by humans, but they were much more intuitive, and they sort of passed the sanity checks of the people. They were kind of, the reporters could understand what they're doing, the doctors could understand what they're doing, the stakeholders could. This is the kind of approach I think data science needs to move into, as opposed to how do we get the maximum accuracy at all costs, where it's okay with some convolutional neural network and it produces a number and it's the best we can do. We have to be a little more subtle than that, I think.
There's plenty of times when I've been listening to a story on NPR about our work, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then it gets to like the last 30 seconds, and they just like destroy all, like they just totally misinterpreted all of the data and everything, and you're like, well, the general public probably doesn't know that that's wrong, but it still down. And luckily, like, we haven't had anything, you know, like the Alaska example that happened. It hasn't been like that crazy, but it's, yeah, the normal person can look at the data and totally misinterpret it or misspeak, and it's, I don't want to say discouraging, but a little bit of a slap in the face. So just, yeah, make sure that, I don't want to say it's dumbed down, but it's understandable for everybody.
So you mentioned press, you mentioned NPR, Bill, you mentioned some of the motivations of some researchers and getting things out there. I know, I'm going to ask a question, and this might be, it's going to ask us all to be a bit more introspective, I guess. But I know one of the things that sometimes keep me up at night is that data science for social good is just a nice way of, like, the new cognoscenti feeling good about themselves. You know, a new way for us all to feel good about the work. Because data science is fuzzy, right, and it's sexy in some way, it's really easy to get a nice press release out of doing a project, let's see. And yet, you know, fundamentally, you only are delivering on the promise of it's changing the lives of the most vulnerable population. How do we know that we're not just fooling ourselves into feeling good about because it's an echo chamber in here. We're all doing really well in our lives, and we're well educated and all that. How do we actually know that we're delivering on our promise?
I think this is a time to engage, you know, once a project is released, to engage people for qualitative and anecdotes, you know, just to, you know, we mentioned before that, you know, we don't get census data that often, so we can't really see if, you know, we affected poverty or, you know, median household income or anything. But if you are engaging kind of the end user or the people that could be affected by this work in some capacity, that is an opportunity to see if things need to be tweaked, if it is making an impact, to get some feedback and really ensure that your model, your data is being used in an effective and important mechanism.
Despite the Alaska example, which is a counterexample, I'm going to backpedal here a little bit, I feel like there is a partnership with the press here, that if you are generating work that tends to generate press, that's not the world's worst projection of this, right? Because without that, you're either doing things that nobody cares about, or, well, maybe that's it. I don't know. But I think there's you know, it's ridiculous to stand up and say that that's the metric, of course. You're not collecting press releases like, you know, whoever dies with the most wins or something. That's not the goal. But there is, I guess I encourage us to introspect. And I was reflecting on the fact that I do tend to encourage, you know, getting word out there as much as possible. And I'm wondering if that's a bad thing. I've sort of decided in the last few years, but I'm not sure it is, right? Because there is, the journalists are doing their job as well, hopefully. And in the one Alaska case, there was a kind of mutual screw up there. I think about the researchers kind of putting their needs ahead, but also the journalists publishing it and sensationalizing so much. And it sounds like there's mistakes there. But I do feel like that the partnership with the people who are interpreting the narrative and communicating out to the public and saying this is an important thing that we should all be aware of. I don't know. There's something. It seems like that's a positive signal overall. But it's my attempt to be a little bit provocative. I'm not sure if I'm succeeding, but I don't know. I don't mind press releases.
You wake up in the morning and you feel good about yourself. Like today, I did data science for social good. But why?
Well, it's so, I don't know, so obvious, I sort of feel weird saying it, right? That life is short and, you know, we only get one shot, and so you better work on something that's going to change in a significant way, right? But there was something else, sorry, I don't know if that was a great answer, but back to what I wanted to say.
That's what panels are about. Good question, but this is better.
You were asking earlier, you know, how do we make sure that we're not deluding ourselves that we are working on the social good? I think the domain expertise is very important, and there's a danger of us coming in and say, step back, I'm a data scientist, give me some data, I will fix
I'm the
this
expert.
problem for you, right? But really, I think we all basically know that you need domain expertise in order to solve a problem, because it's not just, data in, data out, I'm done, right? So we all care about things in our lives, right? So professionally, you might be an expert in healthcare or in something else, energy, education. So work on things that you know and you can assess that you're making a contribution, not just like, wouldn't it be cool to solve the this issue? But also, I think personally we're all involved in areas of social good that matter a lot to us, and that we know are social good. And kind of the way free market works, if we all kind of work on what we consider important on average, important issues will get addressed, right? So, for example, we mentioned alcoholism earlier, things like autism, transgender rights, we all have these things that touch our lives in many ways, right? And we have, for one reason or another, we have a very good insight of the problems and what could be done, maybe on a small scale, maybe medium, large, right? So when you know that, when you understand the problem, and you know that this is indeed social good, maybe for a small population, but still, right? You work on that and you're sure, right? Versus, I'd like to improve education. That's social good, right? When you work on improving education, you could say third graders are, reading at this level versus this level. I know because I volunteer at a local school and this is what happens. So I'm going to, help improve the targeting system or the way the volunteers are assigned to kids or something like that, right? And that's like a surefire way to feel good about doing social good and to know that it is social good. For kind of filling in those small spaces in between the big government projects and the other makings that are out. Does that make sense?
So I think as is true of every undergrad for at least one semester, I was a philosophy major. So, I had to pull out dust off the old, Plato and Aristotle textbooks. And just, remind ourselves like what were they thinking about, what the good was, right? And Plato and through Socrates talk about knowledge and truth are important, but the good is yet more prized. And Aristotle emphasized that virtue is practical, and the purpose of ethics is to become good, not merely to know what good is. And yet, all of these DSSG programs are housed in universities where the thing of importance that gets generated is new knowledge. Especially if you look at Aristotle's definition, it's the new knowledge is not sufficient to achieve the good. Knowledge of ethics is something practical you have to see in action. So I guess this is meant to be a little bit pointed. Is it, as data scientists, the main thing we're producing is new knowledge. We're producing new information. Is it sufficient for us to say we've done good in the world if all we produce is a paper, even if it's on education or homelessness? Or do we need to do more than that? Does it need to be more than just, hey, I got something published in KP, I've done social good?
Certainly not KP. Sorry, as a computer scientist, I don't think computer science papers have much of a monopoly on the knowledge creation in the world. But so yeah, this is broader than data science, right? This is all of research, I suppose. But no, I think yeah, you do need to go beyond just knowledge creation if you're going to earn this sort of new moniker, data science for social good, as opposed to data science full stop, right? So yeah, I would say, we started to talk about RD&D, right? Research, development, and deployment, which is the model that we sort of invoke, and figuring out how to shift universities to participate more deeply in that sort of pipeline is of interest to a lot of people. And DSSG programs are one fantastic example of that. But yeah, I think it's more important than just the papers. Do you read papers, I guess, too?
One of the things that attracted us to this program and participating in it this year was our first year, was the fact, and I think during the scoping conversation or the workshop yesterday, people talked about it, is that you actually had to come up with ideas of, how are you going to use this information? What initiatives are you going to deploy in order to use that? And I know that you guys may not always have that luxury, but maybe there's an opportunity to, while you're engaged in this research, there's probably in most cities at least like a not-for-profit or a community group or somebody that would find that information useful. So is there the opportunity to reach out while you're going through this research just to introduce yourselves and maybe you can say, I want to get a better understanding of this situation in the community and start to build a relationship with people so that even if you personally don't have the opportunity to take this and do good with it or do like physical implementation of something that's going to affect it, you can pass off your work and have partnerships with other people who then can hopefully take it and employ it in some capacity.
That's great. All right, let's open it up for some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something kind of Elena said, just thinking about the title of this talk, this session, like what does it mean to do social good? So earlier you asked a question that was kind of like, for the panelists saying, how do you evaluate the amount of good your project is doing? And I was thinking about asking the question that way versus what it might be in a different context, saying like, how do you evaluate the impact of your project? And I think what's kind of implied by putting it in the framework of social good is that you're kind of trying to compare, does this project do more social good or does this project do more social good? And at the end of the day, I should preface this by saying that I'm kind of with Elena on this, that I feel like social good is a very subjective individual thing, so it's kind of hard to define it in a general way. But I'm kind of curious, I kind of want to throw it back and kind of sort of put the panelists more on the spot and ask them, what is your individual definition of social good? Because the definition of social good is kind of the totality of other people's opinion of that, just like you said. And so I'm wondering, if I take my statistics degree and I go work for an investment bank, and I deeply believe that I'm improving the world by increasing liquidity, versus I take my degree and I go work for a hospital to better allocate hospital beds. How do you make the judgment that one is better than the other, whichever that is? Like, what is your opinion about which one is better and why?
You just have a global welfare function for us. So yeah, that's an excellent question. What is, this is a little bit, the first question, I think it's a much more pointed one. What is your personal definition of the good?
The people know Jeff Hammerbacher's quote, he quipped that this was going to be on his tombstone because it gets repeated so often. Basically, the greatest minds of my generation are trying to figure out how to make people click on ads. Right, so this sort of motivated me to think about, well, what's not that? and where can you drive it? Yeah, well, where can you find some other examples where these methods are equally applicable and equally sort of valuable, but at least pass the sniff test of being approximately that. However, it's a very insightful question, and it's how do you pass judgment between this one or that one? I don't know if I have an answer. I guess the other thing I sometimes think about is, good is the enemy of great, and so you can sort of feel good about yourself because you did some kind of a small impact and someone got help. They really got a lift, but perhaps the opportunity cost of you spending time on that as opposed to something else is there. So at least I personally try to give some exposure to the fact of where's the biggest impact as opposed to most satisfying impact personally. But what algorithm do I use, or how do I actually do that, or do I do well with that? I have no idea.
I think that it's a very intrinsic thing. You're going to have to decide for yourself. So I worked in the private sector, and now I work in government, and I wake up every morning, and I just feel different. I feel, and I can't explain it, but I go to work, and I'm making a difference today. It can still be a crappy day, but I still had a good day. Before, I was designing hockey skates, so great, people can skate faster. I don't know, maybe that means the NHL team is doing better and that city is going, I don't know, be more successful. Or I worked with some Olympians, great, maybe we'll do better in the Olympics, we'll have increased patriotism and everything will be great. But to have to go through those things to justify why your work is good, you could still be a fun job, but it's just this, I don't know, this intrinsic feeling that you get that, and going in and making a difference. And
So it
it's
sounds like
really-
it's the number of hops you make
I was
before
gonna
you
say,
fall
it
asleep.
sounds like it's a opportunity.
Maybe it is, yeah.
Because I could, optimizing ad clicks and say, this is good, it's driving business, this is generating jobs, what people need in order to.
But that's 5, so that's.
Yeah, that's right. 5 on passive. Okay, so you've got you've got some sort of diminishing returns on hops.
And to me, this is, I don't like the idea of it being binary, right? Is it social good, is it not social good? And I think of it as a scale, right? And some points on the scale are very clear to me. So in the social bad, there are companies that are trying to figure out how to get more people to smoke, right? That to me is
What?
bad. I know, right? There's casinos trying to figure out how to make this, the whole process more addictive to people. Like that's, right, bad. I think most of society would agree, right? That's one end of the scale. The other end of the scale is, like I think I was mentioning previously, like reducing infant mortality, right? That's very obvious, right? Improving education, lifting people out of poverty, somewhere is like fixing potholes and so on, right? And then there's like the gray zone of reducing fraud on eBay. Catching criminals, that's a good thing, but like on eBay, like it's neutral, I don't know, right? Like, you're helping eBay do better, but you're helping the customers, but it's debatable. So I think as a society, we probably have a general shape that's similar, of ranking, and there's some local kind of swapping, right, where you value health more than education, and maybe it's the other way around for me. And it's okay to debate that and to have that personal, as long as the general direction is clear, right, where we're good things. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I try not to get bogged down in my mind, smaller problems of like, should this be before this or after this? Because I feel like there's so many clear points that we still have to figure out and address, before we get down to the lesser ones that we need to make it less clear, and then we can. By then, I think things will be more mature in this whole process, right? Data science will evolve. We're going to have 4 years to think about social good, and then we can probably answer this better. But for now, I think we have marching orders, and we don't have to wait and debate the rest.
If I understand, your internal social good algorithm generates a ring-loaded list. Another question.
So you talked about interpretability and being able to understand the results that data scientists are handing off. And sometimes I think about how there's so many models that people trust. Like people get on planes where they don't understand like the simulations, and they trust like their life in those simulations that the plane's going to stay. They like invest in, portfolios, like a lot of their money, and they don't understand like how that portfolio was like constructed. Why is it? I think it's an unfair standard that like when you do social good with data science, you're supposed to give off like precision or like whatever, so that like the model is more interpretable, because like that in a lot of cases is a lot of people. So like, can you talk about why like?
Yeah, I can. So if I took a script off the web and ran it and produced an airplane, and asked people to fly in it, the analogy would be clear, but that's not the process that people use. There's many hundreds and thousands of people that go in there, many sort of levels of checks and balances that go into sort of building planes and running the system. Software has the beauty and the danger of software is that it's extremely easy to bang out results very quickly, and that rapidity of it is dangerous. And so I think I don't think right now at the time we need less skepticism about it. We need more, because it's so easy to sort of produce these results that are fishy. It's not easy to produce a plane, and so I don't think the analogy really holds. That's not right.
One more question from the audience, yeah.
I'm kind of interested in the attitude that you guys expressed as far as trying to extend outside of academia and actually have impact in the work that you do. But I wonder what happens when you cross that line, and if your search for knowledge kind of ends up working for a client or a customer, and how that changes expectations. If they have, even if they're an institution that is looking to deliver a social good, they might have some certain biases, and how do you avoid following the path least resistance to just kind of like do the job that they hire you to, or do you feel like sort of tacking on social good to the end of what you're doing implies some sort of like responsibility to point out if resources aren't being used as effectively, or if like there's a hypothesis that's looking to be confirmed that maybe it's looking like maybe this isn't the root cause of the issue, but this is what you're being paid to evaluate or not. Does that
That's
make
good.
sense?
I'm glad you. So it's good. Someone should always bring up Voltaire, or more recently, Superman or Spider-Man. Sorry. So like, we had great power, great responsibility, whether it be with the city or any other client. What is your responsibility to someone who said, "I really love it if you could say that this was true," and it's not.
Well, from the city perspective, we're so, at least I think a lot of governments are so new to data, and a lot of us are operating on limited budgets. We don't want to make stupid mistakes. So if I hired you as a consultant, I would at least like you to, if you discovered something, like send me an email and be like, let's grab coffee sometime. I just want to go over something with you. And then I have the opportunity to choose what I want to do with that. But I don't know if like from other sectors, like what people would say.
I guess the one thing I was thinking about when we were asking is there are codes of ethics. There's groups that are trying to figure this out for data science, but essentially it's already been done for statutes. The American Statistical Association has a code of ethics, and they have thought very deeply about some of these issues, like your responsibility to the client, your responsibility to the broader public, their responsibility to yourself, their responsibility to your employers, and so forth. They write this out in sections, and many of the issues you brought up are covered. I think it's unfortunate that now that we've sort of come up with a new term, data science, and broaden, it's not just equivalent, I don't mean to say it's equivalent to statistics, I definitely believe that, but it's got some things in common with it. We seem to have left behind all the other stuff that the statistics field has come up with. So I'd say that the ethical considerations cover some of these issues, and we just need to adopt those when we engage in these projects.
I think the Boulder Initiative also is working on a kind of statement of code of ethics. So there's a lot of thought already. And just a quick comment from the industry point of view, that this is not just in government and nonprofits. So in a previous life, I was working with a health insurance company that wanted to figure out early on problems with health claims. So they didn't want to underpay health claims, so they could add issues and eventually have to pay fines. They didn't want to overpay, so then they have to figure out how to get the money back, right? And so we came up with a model that predicted if there was going to be overpayment, underpayment, so it went to a person who would have to re-review and fix before it goes out. And then you can probably guess where this is going. The company came to us and said, so is there any way that you would just tell us about the overpayments? Right, and what do you say, right? You say no, you have to do both, but obviously they don't have to do both, right? It's, we give them the model, but you know that they're going to do whatever they want with the model, right? So in that case, you point out, if this were to leak and people out there were to discover that you knew how to do both but only did one, right? Maybe that's something you should consider, right? So sometimes you don't have a direct ability to force people to do the right thing, but consider implication greatly help them go in the right direction.
So just to wrap up, because we're in our last few minutes, I want to do one last pass on the line. And so now, after an hour, almost an hour, we all know precisely what it is to do social good. Great. We answered that, so so we're all trying to do social good. How can we do good better? What is what's left for us to do? Where do we go next?
You're making it sound like phase 1 is done. Like what is phase 2? I feel like we're in like phase 0 right now.
That's right. So what's phase 0 look like?
We're all continuing with the projects that we're working on. You mean what's next? What's next for the world, for the industry?
No, for you.
For your own
us,
project?
How do we, leaving today, say, all right, I've done something. What do I do next to make sure that, or to increase the likelihood that what I've started to do is actually going to affect someone's life? It's actually going to make a difference. That I know with a greater sense of certainty that I've made.
We've covered a lot of these, but just maybe try to recap some of these. But I think deeper engagement with domain experts I think is important. I think greater appreciation for what we should do rather than we can do with some of these methods that we've been fairness, accountability, and transparency. I think this project selection discussion was pretty interesting about how you sort of where you invest your time. So I thought we sort of covered it all in the discussion, but I think bringing the adoption of ethics that came up at the end here, we're not. I think as a field, if data science is a field, we're not doing quite as much of that yet, but I think we will soon. So I think increased investment across all those areas would be doing good stuff better, perhaps. Shut up.
Yeah, I was going to echo many of the same things, but one of the things that I think would be great is I think there are still so many people who don't understand the power of data and how to use it for good. So is there an opportunity for you to give back in any capacity and to share your knowledge and to get other people interested in this field? As I mentioned, now we're really starting to focus on economic opportunity in Syracuse, and one of the things we're starting to look at is there a way to take kids, for example, in neighborhoods that typically are disadvantaged or disinvested, and teach them skills like coding or something that they otherwise wouldn't have. So in addition to engaging people and teaching them about how to use data, is there maybe an opportunity for you guys to reach out and teach this to other people who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity to learn?
And something that came up in the previous panel that we had was once you have a result, once you have a success, even if it's a small one, is something very particular, share the lessons learned and share the best practices, and obviously make the code open source, right, if possible. But educate about what you found and help people get on the shortcut to getting similar results. And
Great. Well, thank you, Adria, Bill, and Elena, for a really great conversation. There's going to be group discussions this afternoon. Several of them are going to be opportunities for you as a group to really engage with several of the topics brought up today. So thank you all for listening, for participating, and enjoy the rest of the day.